Thank you. Thank you. Kindly be seated. Let me ask you a question, not as president, but as a student of history. Have you ever wondered why the story of Ghana never included the story of the diaspora? When telling the story of Ghana, many are inclined to begin in 1821 with the formation of the British-ruled Gold Coast colony. But that's inaccurate, because the collective story of our people, the many ethnic groups that populate this country, Ghana, predates the existence of any colony on this African continent. Similarly, when speaking of the transatlantic slave trade, specifically the atrocities that took place on this soil, many are inclined to end our story on the shores of this nation, where our ancestors, and I do mean that word literally because they were our blood and bone that were forced onto ships and transported across the Atlantic. But why do these events that follow cease to be part of Ghana's story also? Between the 16th and 19th centuries, nearly 13 million African men, women, and children were captured and transported on ships through the Middle Passage. Over 2 million of them died, some because of the harsh conditions, and others because of disease. But there were also those who chose to end it all by jumping overboard. And there were also the ships that sank in storms on the Atlantic, taking with them our forebears who were shackled and chained limb to limb, turning the Gulf of Guinea and the waters of the Atlantic beyond it into a graveyard of our ancestors. Ghana contains more slave forts and castles than any other nation on the African continent. Indeed, over 70 of them, with many still intact, but there are others that lie in ruins today. People who were captured in other areas of the sub-region were marched on foot to one of the forts or castles on Ghana's coast, where they were kept, usually in dungeons, until it was time for them to be loaded as cargo onto ships. Given all this, it would be safe to assume that a significant percentage of the enslaved people, even if they did not originate from the area that is now called Ghana, passed through it on their way to the slave destinations. What followed for each and every one of those individuals is as much a part of Ghana's story as what followed for us who remained firmly rooted here on our soil, but were subjugated and rendered second-class citizens nonetheless through colonization. As Kendrick says, bear with me for a second and let me put you on the game. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to land on our shores. They began the practice of extraction of gold, copper, ivory, chili peppers, and then eventually they moved on to the extraction of human beings. It was the Portuguese who gave the river Volta its name. Volta in Portuguese means to return. They used the river Volta as a kind of boundary. It was the farthest they could travel. Once there, they had to turn around and begin their return. The Portuguese, who were superb shipwrights and navigators, therefore called Volta do Mar, which literally translates as return from the sea, but can also be taken as a turn of the sea. With Volta do Mar, they reversed the course of their ships, using the winds from the currents created by the North Atlantic jar to carry them faster without encountering rough waters. The point at which the river Volta empties into the Gulf of Guinea is part of the Atlantic Ocean. It is called the estuary of the Volta at Adanfuan. For those of you who have not yet had the pleasure of visiting Adan, it is a small coastal town a little over 100 kilometers away from Accra. I've spent some of my most peaceful moments there. I've enjoyed the tranquil river until where it meets the choppy, aggressive waters of the Atlantic Ocean. For years, I did not know the history of these two bodies of water. When I found out, I was stunned. And every time I think about it, I'm still shaken by the cruel irony that even as our people who were enslaved were being forced to walk through the door of no return, their captors had already ensured their own safe return and even memorialized their method of achieving it by lending its name to a river. The Ghanaian American author Ya Jesse wrote in her novel, Homegoing, "We believe the one who has power. He's the one who gets to write the story. So when you study history, you must ask yourself, whose story am I missing? Whose voice was suppressed? So that this voice can come forth. Once you have figured that out, you must find that story too as part of the narrative. By finding and owning the stories of our past, the ones that have been suppressed, we're able to truly know ourselves. And with that knowledge of self comes the power to write ourselves truthfully, respectfully, into not only our future, but the future of all humanity. And that is why we're gathered here today at this Diaspora Summit.